Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Asians in Tech by Black UX Austin. We have a great panel here tonight, and we're excited to share their stories with you tonight. Um, I just want to preface first and give some attention to a burgeoning topic that's happening right now, which is what's happening in India. If you're not aware, India is going through some terrible times right now with their second wave of the pandemic. So I'm not entirely sure what the action is for us, but just to be aware of it and know that they're going through terror right now, and we need to put the pressure on our government to extend our vaccines to them so that they are supported. Tonight we have, like I said, a great panel, and we're going to hear about their paths in tech, as well as hashtag Stop Asian Hate, the current movement that's happening right now, as well as Black allyship. So please stay tuned for the entire talk, and enjoy. Hopefully you have some great takeaways from this. First, I want to introduce us. What Black UX Austin is. Black UX Austin is a safe space for people of African ancestry who may identify as Black to meet other Black user experience professionals in Austin to build a community and thriving network. UX professionals would include content strategists, designers, developers, researchers, product managers, etc. Allies are also welcomed. We have a safe space on Slack for Black individuals. We ask that our allies utilize our public spaces like Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and I think Meetup as well. Where you can reach us is blackuxaustin@gmail.com, as well as on Slack, blackuxaustin/help. On our leadership team is Carmen Broomes, who is a researcher at Handshake, Chase Chenevert, who is a designer at Parachute Health, Dr. Lisanne Norman, who is a researcher at Gusto, and Riad Nassar, who is a designer at Austin Community College, Sarah Overton, who's a designer at Indeed, Crystal Paull, who's a researcher at Amazon, and me, Treavor Wagoner, your host tonight, design at Redfin. On the panel tonight is Angela Yang, who identifies as Chinese American, and she, her. Angela is an experienced strategist and growth accelerator with a 12-year track record of building meaningful relationships between brands and customers through the power of digital. As VP of Business Development at Razorfish, Angela is charged with building a culture of growth to help clients, brands adapt and grow and thrive. Angela uses her voice to demand the industry reflect the diverse perspective of its end customers and underrepresented talent in the industry. We're excited to hear from you, Angela. Also on the panel is Lan Johnson. She identifies as Korean Vietnamese American, she, her. With over 10 plus years of experience designing solutions for Fortune 500 companies, Lan has developed a passion for helping clients understand customer insights, then translating these insights into design-led solutions. She also has the ability to work hand in hand with agile development teams with my combined background in communications design, and front-end development. We also have Paul Kim, who is a Korean American. He identifies as he, him. Paul is a product designer currently at Dropbox, crafting experiences that bring order to the myriad of content everybody has these days. Paul also mentors through ADP List and Design Lab. We'll also hear more about that later. And his eyes set on a future in design education one day. Paul and his wife are expecting their first child in a few weeks. Congratulations, along with their 2 current fur children. Yay, congratulations. We also have Sherrie Nguyen, who identifies as Vietnamese American. Her pronouns are she, her. Sherrie is a longtime Austinite, wife to her high school sweetheart, and mother to 4-year-old Amaya. She is an activist for working parents and caregivers, and she's on a mission to reimagine a world of work centered on caring. Sherrie has worked in tech for over 15 years and is employed with Indeed as a product manager and also founder and co-chair of the Parents and Caregivers Inclusion Resource Group, which we'll also hear more about that later too. Sherrie also mentors with Young Women's Alliance and Breakthrough of Central Texas. Thank you, Sherrie, for joining us. And last but not least, we have Veni Kunche, who identifies as Indian American. Her pronouns are she, her. Veni is a coder, a maker, a founder, and a mom. After working as a software engineer for 15 years, she launched Diversify Tech to help make the tech industry more inclusive. Diversify Tech connects underrepresented people in tech to opportunities as well as help companies hire them. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're super excited to hear more about your stories. With that said, let's jump into the Q&A. Sherrie, you are the first Asian American woman to be awarded the Austin Under 40 Award in the technology category, and you won it in 2020. Can you tell us more about that? How was that?
Thank you. Thanks, Trevor. Thank you, blackuxaustin, for having me tonight. And thank you for those of you who have joined and come to listen to our stories. Thank you so much for highlighting our voices. So yes, you mentioned the Austin Under 40 Award for Technology. My first thought and response was, it's about damn time. And I say that because why did it take till 2020 for an Asian woman to win? And it's time to highlight our voices here in Austin. I'll say honestly, it felt great at first because for me, the win was a win for my activism for parents and caregivers. It was about time that people recognize the plight we have been going through, trying to balance work and caregiving in a space, corporate America that was never created for women to begin with was untenable. And COVID blew that up. And then people started paying attention. But I also felt recognized for the role that I play at Indeed in building inclusive products. I'm on the product marketing team, advocating for better policies with our benefits team and trying to build a more inclusive culture in my work. I just felt like it was finally time for recognition. But I'll say the other side to this is that I felt a little bit of frustration, honestly, that not only I mentioned it's taken a while, it's just also the sense of tokenism of if you are the first, you carry everybody who's been there before you, as well as have to pave the way for everybody going forward. And I think that can be exhausting. And a Black gay man once told me, like, I don't want to be the Black gay poster child for everyone. I just want to be me. And I think that it's a responsibility and also a burden, I think, to carry, which is really how I define motherhood as well. And the last learning I have is that I don't feel like awards define your worth. So after all the hubbub kind of, left, my husband was like, so what now? Like, what, And COVID has set me on a path of defining what I think really makes me happy. And work is a huge part of that. And I really want to make sure the work I do is meaningful. So it's furthered my motivation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope you see more from me in that area. I'm really committed and excited to continue doing the work.
I think we will. I'm pretty sure we will. Congratulations again on that award. Lan, hi. You were recently promoted to UX manager at Capital One. According to a Wired, congratulations, by the way. According to a Wired article published in 2019, big tech companies like Microsoft began promoting more women following disclosing their diversity reports in 2015. What has been your promotion experience as a woman in tech? And also, have you found it to be more difficult or fair than your peers?
I guess classic UX answer, it depends. I think it has been completely unfair if I'm comparing myself to the majority, of course. For anyone in a disenfranchised group, it has definitely been more difficult for them than myself. I think that I have been conditioned to believe that if I just work hard, I'll get whatever opportunity, and that's it is. But the reality is there are more obstacles for different sets of people, and there are certain challenges that I have to overcome that feels so silly to have to overcome, except being a woman of color who looks like they just got out of grade school. There has definitely been some blatant disrespect. I mean, among all the other challenges of being, an Asian woman being perceived as submissive and obedient. And so, it just depends. And, I think I have to work to help build better tables for people within my community and outside of my community, and hoping my allies will speak up when their voice needs to be heard.
Right. I think that's something that, as an ally to women, something that I do, especially in the meeting room, is, I've seen it many times where, a woman, whether it be actually a woman of color, typically, will say something and, we'll just talk over her or just not listen, even though she's like the authority on the subject that we're talking about. And so I have to I'll let that person, the interrupter, say what they need to say, but I'll bring it right back to the person who was, who knows what they're talking about, the woman of color in the room. So I think that's one way that, our allies can speak up and ensure that voices are heard in the room. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Angela, you recently moved into a new role as VP of Business of Growth at Razorfish. What has been the most valuable thing you've learned up to this point in your career? Congratulations.
Wow. That's a big question because I've learned so much from other people that have been there for me during the time. And there are a couple of things too. And I just want to play off of what Lan and Sherrie had said about really needing to constantly have to prove yourself and to be able to overcome some of the stereotypes and perceptions that might come with being an AAPI, not only a person, but also a female, right? Or a cisgender female. So there's a lot of intersectionality that goes with that. But I think what really I've learned throughout my career in getting to what you would say a seat at the table, right? The coveted seat is that it really doesn't happen when you are alone, right? So there's a lot of mentorship that has to happen. There's a lot of doors that have to happen that open for you. It's not necessarily about if you try hard, you work hard enough, you're going to get there every single time. That's not necessarily the case. And so the ways that I would think about it of what I've learned is that having that mentor is such a key part for your empowerment and your enablement to be able to get to that spot, to be able to get promoted. So I feel like if I were to have a tip for people out there is to find that person or have that person find you, be open to it. It's so easy to say mentorship, but what does it mean? What does it look like? How do you get there? How do you find it? It's really hard, but it's really important. So I would say that has really helped me elevate in the role that I've had as well. I think one other thing that I've learned throughout this whole process too is that when you are trying to either find that position or balance career, being a mom, all these things, I think part of it is also being true to yourself too, and being able to stand up for what you believe in, but also help others along the way. And that can be very tough, but I think if there is an authenticity, a part of you that's really genuine and has positive intent, that will go so far. So I could keep going. We could probably take up the whole time talking about life lessons, but those are some of the things that I've learned. And I'm so grateful to be a part of this panel and to see other very talented folks. So.
No, we're great. We're glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. So according to a study by the National Women's Law Center, Asian American and Pacific Islander women lose $400,000 over a 40-year career span in comparison to their white male counterparts. What has been your experience with pay disparity, and have you found it difficult to negotiate a salary? Sherrie, I'll start with you.
Thanks. I'll answer the question, but I'm going to drop a few more facts because I think that is a great stat that you covered. Something that was actually surprising to me is the National Alliance for Asian American Women and Pacific Islander Forum put out this chart that showed the Asian pay gap by ethnicity for women. And Asians have the biggest disparity in pay across any other race here in the US. So it's really drastic. For example, Taiwanese, Indian, and Malaysian women make $1.21 compared to white non-Hispanic men. But Nepalese and Burmese women make 54 and 52 cents to the dollar. And so when you really break it down, Vietnamese women like me make around 63 cents to the dollar. And so we have to really understand and unpack Asians not as a monolith, but we'll dive into this later. Veni's going to, tell us a little bit about like classism. And then Angela's already talked about gender, but parental status, ableism, all of these things really play into that as well. But I'll share that when I was working for a company at the time and I was interviewing for a job. And as I was about to sign the offer or get the offer, my boss told me, "You're a workhorse." And I was shocked, but he looked at my salary at the time and compared to other salaries of people at the same job title as me and said, "They've been working you too hard for what you're getting paid, and I'm going to bump you up significantly." So it was more than I was going to ask for. And this man, this white man, my boss who had looked out for me so much, told me that straight up. And I have had women look out for me and ask me, if you're going to entertain a job offer, what are you asking for? And this is the appropriate range for this title, or you should push for more. And we need to talk about things like that and support one another. So I'm super grateful for that lesson. I've negotiated every salary for any job ever, but it comes with having these conversations and being told what's comparable and what's not, and that shouldn't be hidden.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. I'm really glad that your manager, I think it was manager, right? That he spoke up and said something and looked out for you. I think that's something, if managers, white managers in particular, are looking for a way to support people of color, look at that. That's a good way to start, honestly. Make sure that we are paid what we're worth. And, equity is everything. Veni, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I wanted to share a few of my personal stories. Like for my first job, which was like in 2003, when I first got into tech, actually did not negotiate my salary at all because I didn't know I was supposed to. And that's one of the things that happens when you're an immigrant and you don't know the rules of the workplace. So nobody, throughout college, nobody ever mentioned to me that I was supposed to do this, and I also had no mentors. I didn't have anybody who could tell me that information. So for the first 3 years, 3 jobs, I actually never negotiated my salary. And, because of that, because I never negotiated, for that was like a span of 6 years or so, I was always given, whatever the lowest band is probably, and over years that kind of adds up. Mm-hmm. And another thing that happens is that people never considered me for promotions. I also did not know how that worked, that I was supposed to work for it. I did not know. I was very naive in the sense that I thought people just pay for your worth. And I also thought that if you do the right things, they will promote you because they recognize your hard work. Obviously, that is not true. And I learned that the hard way. Eventually, I learned, okay, you're supposed to negotiate your salary. And for my third job, I think I did try. And honestly, I got pushback. They were actually very offended that I tried to negotiate my salary. So again, I was getting confusing messages. I thought I was supposed to negotiate. So why are you mad at me? So that happened. And then at a later job, for years, I think I was supposed to get promoted to a senior engineer a while back. I didn't know how to navigate that, and it never happened. So my salary just like over years just kept being low and low, and not the right level for what my experience. And then one workplace, which I thought was a great workplace, actually got a random promotion because somebody spread a rumor that I was going to quit the company. And I was like, what? So you were paying me my worth now that you think I'm leaving, but you didn't think to do this before. So, whoever started the rumor kind of helped me that I got a promotion and like a 10% raise. But so one of the things that's hard is that when you don't have people that look like you as role models or like that are part of your network, you don't know what you're supposed to do. So, and that really, puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to negotiations and pay increases and all of that.
Right. No, I totally understand. And also applying to jobs and going through the interview process and negotiations and even like promotions and everything like that. I feel like it's designed to be murky. Like there's no, I don't think there is a handbook around how to do this the right way. I think also that negotiation thing, that's like what business people do. And when you're an individual contributor, when you're a creative, when you're a person who just codes or whatnot, you're not thinking business. You're thinking, I just need money to pay my bills. So thank you for sharing that. And actually, while I have have you at the mic, what is it like being an Indian woman developer? Excuse me.
To put it short, it's very lonely. Because it's kind of confusing because, all of the stats say there are lots of Indians in tech, Indian folks in tech. That's what a lot of the stats say. And I've been a software engineer for like 17 years, and I've never actually met an Indian woman who was a software engineer. I just never met another person. And I always wonder, where are all these Indians who are apparently in tech, right? So that's why it's like hard to believe all these stats out there, because they're choosing to share only a certain, or the way they collect their data is like skewed to Silicon Valley, maybe, things like that. So being an Indian woman in tech has been pretty much like me trying to figure out how things work. I guess to put it into context, so I used to live in Minnesota and Wisconsin, which tends to be very, very not diverse. So I always was the only woman of color, only minority in all of my workplaces. Only after I moved to the East Coast have I, found other people who look like me. So to sum it up, it's hard to negotiate being the only through the workplace.
I think a lot of people of color in the audience are probably used to being the onlys at their companies. So at least you have you can share the experience of being the only with other onlys. But I do want to say we have a comment in the chat from Malati, who says, "I am an Indian woman database administrator and active in my community. There are 2 of us, so you're not alone." That's amazing. So I want to divert the attention to the only male on the panelists, Paull, and soon to be dad. What is it like being an Asian man in tech? What are some challenges or assumptions that you have faced?
Yeah, so I'll start with the optics of how it looks. To my mom, I didn't become a doctor, so she doesn't know what I do. So there's that. She doesn't really understand what it's like to not be a doctor in tech. And then I think, Treavor, you and I are talking about this. I think probably the other optical thing that happens at work is that I think when I'm on a team, they just kind of sometimes assume that I am an engineer. There's not I would say like there are I would assume that there's a lot of Asian men in tech. There's probably far fewer Asian men who are in design. And so there's kind of, sometimes I walk into a project and I've actually been asked many times, like if I can code, and I say no, and I get some shade from some engineers. But yeah, so those are some like kind of optical things I think that are going on, kind of like day to day. I think some of the more like pervasive kind of challenges and assumptions are that I think, and this is just my opinion, I can't speak for every Asian or every Asian man in tech, but I think that there is a large percentage, when you look at, tech companies, like I think there are a lot of Asian men. And I think one of the challenges is that, with different cultures and different backgrounds, it's sometimes we don't really know where to have, if we need permission to engage or to listen or to participate in certain things. I think it can be very easy, at least from my side, to just kind of like know what my mom taught me of like, just do the right thing rather than having the permission to actually influence and persuade. And I think there's a lot of power in the numbers that I think Asian men do have in tech companies, because there are a larger population of them. That I find that I'm kind of just, even like today, we had our diversity team had like a presentation and just kind of going and listening and just kind of encouraging that and bringing like another person of color, a minority, to bring into that conversation, especially if they're an Asian man. I think it can be very easy to be complicit with just not engaging or being silent. And so I think there's kind of that personal kind of like challenge I think that Asian men need to kind of challenge themselves on. And then I think on the other side, just like kind of like how other people can be allies to Asian men is kind of treating them as individuals rather than just kind of this like carbon copy. I think that sometimes like people just assume, and I don't think this is just like a male thing. I think this is just kind of anybody of color. They can just kind of be characterized as like, oh, like I know this kind of person, so you must act and say the same things. And so just kind of like engaging with them at an individual level, that getting to know their stories sometimes can be challenging of like, no, I'm not an engineer. Like, yes, English is not my second language, but like I can speak it. Like, just kind of like some of those things that feel really simple, but honestly can be kind of exhausting when it's compounded over time.
Yeah. I think a lot of Black people in the audience can empathize with you on the weight and the exhaustion, so on and so on, about the microaggressions that you face over your, even just like a week, but I'm thinking like throughout your whole entire career. I know a lot of people who have been in the game for 10 plus years or whatever, who are like, I've had enough, I'm maxed out on this experience. So yeah, I think that's another thing where if you're a white ally or ally in general, that's one way that you can look at, of being better, being a better support, is learning more about microaggressions and finding ways that you exhibit them in your day-to-day work. Thank you, Paull, for sharing that. I do have one more question for you, actually, about what was your path into product and UX design?
So I think I'm pretty common in this sense that most people who get to UX don't always have like a direct line from like design school. So I'm one of those. I probably have a little bit of a different path because I studied chemistry and biomedical engineering because I was going for the MD. So that's kind of where that happened. But then when I graduated, I was like, this is not what I want to do. I was getting like carpal tunnel from like pipetting in labs all day long. So I was like, I'm done with this. So ever since I was a kid, I was always like tinkering with design, but the visual graphic design world like felt too subjective to me. Coming from like a very objective, like research oriented, training. And so I think right at the time when I was graduating was when UX was kind of more formulating as its own discipline. And so just kind of identifying that kind of intersection between like, psychology, like research and design, having more of like an objective approach to design thinking was really alluring to me. So when I graduated, there wasn't really any job. So I kind of took just like a random hodgepodge of jobs. I basically was a product manager, even without being called that. And so I kind of did product management for a little bit, and then started to kind of like take on the design work because we didn't have designers. It was basically me just saying like, hey, we should build this with no design input. And so I kind of started to pick up more of the design elements, which came pretty naturally from like, just different things I was already working on. And so then from there, I was like, I'm tired of this, like wearing multiple hats as a product manager. So then I kind of decided like, no, I'm just going to go into design. So Retail Me Not is kind of the first place in town that I got my first like actual design role. And then from there, I've just kind of held on to design positions across some different local companies. And I guess Dropbox is the first non-Austin company that I'm a designer at currently.
Okay, cool. I was going to say, in my roles as a designer, I think you were talking about how before you transitioned to being a designer, you were doing the program management role. I would say like, even as a designer, I've taken on some program management type stuff, type roles, type skills, just because, largely because program managers are largely undervalued in organizations. They don't, a lot of leaders, design leaders, product leaders in general, don't really see the value all the time. So often those responsibilities have to fall to the other disciplines. So yeah, especially it definitely falls on the shoulders of people who give a shit. So which would be you and me. So I sympathize with you on that. Sherrie, what has been a turning point in your career?
Several. There have been several, but I'll say the most impactful one was becoming a mom. So congrats, Paull, on your upcoming debut as a father. Becoming a mom really rocked my world. It was, I mentioned before, like simultaneously a joy and a burden and a responsibility for a life, right? Like nobody tells you the downsides of it. But it really made me see how undervalued moms are in our society, and how we don't see examples of like strong women of color, mother figures anywhere in the media. And I really just was exposed to a lot of bias, which I'll talk about later in becoming a mom. And it made me rethink everything about my career. I used to be the person who would put in lots of hours and similar to what Lan said, like work hard thinking that it'll pay off. And then when I became a mom, I started realizing that people see me as less committed, see me as having distractions, assuming I may not want to travel or care about my career, which is the opposite. I've only been advocating for myself harder, taking on assignments, things like that after becoming a mom. But it also just taught me new ways of working. So I have to be ultra productive. I have to only focus on things that matter. I have to turn off my computer at the end of the day. I will set that hard boundary. So it means I'm constantly having to advocate for my needs. And I think a turning point in my career was I had 2 offers in hand. I was thinking of leaving Indeed. I don't tell a lot of people this story. And one offer was a company that sent me the benefits package that didn't include any parental leave. When I asked, I was like, what happens if I have a kid? And they say, I don't know, like you just go unpaid. And I'm like, that doesn't work. Do you know how much it costs to have a kid and put one into daycare, And then the other company said, we have so much flexibility and we have strong, really great parental policies, and they did on paper. But when I tried to negotiate one day of work from home for a company that told me I had to be in the office and that's how you build culture and that's how you contribute to the team, they said no to one day of work from home. in a world where everybody was on Zoom already, and this is pre-pandemic. And then that company let go 30% of their staff and had to go remote just a couple months later. So it just made me realize, like, I don't know, it was a huge turning point in my career and how I see things. Because now, like, if I get a new job offer, it's not about the salary. It's not even about the role. It's like, will you support me and my family? Will you support my lifestyle? Will you help me thrive? And I think you'll get to a question of burnout. But if you don't feel psychologically safe, it's easy to hit that edge. And I don't want to be there. My family doesn't deserve that either.
Right. Speaking of burnout, have you experienced burnout or imposter syndrome?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah.
Who has not right now? All I can do is get pings on my phone from like CNN and Time telling me how burnt out I am and what to do to get out of the burnout. My managers just told me I've been burnt out before. It took me 6 months to get in, and it'll take you more than 6 months to get out. So it's real. It's the compounding effect of COVID. Like when I recap this year, there was an insurrection at the Capitol, and then we had a freaking snowstorm, and then 6 Asian women and 2 others were murdered. And oh yeah, George Floyd was murdered last year. And let's go on and on about like all the reasons, you know, it makes it hard to just come to work every day. And then the fact that like your home is your workspace, so there's really no separation. And I think a lot of people are working a ton. And I was reading Emily Nagoski's book, Burnout, and just realizing that like every time stress hits, it's a cycle that needs to complete itself. But if it's compounding, when do you ever get out of it? And that's just where we are right now. And it's really hard. I cry a lot and I go to therapy. But I'll let somebody else share their story because I'm sure it's pervasive.
No. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people are experiencing burnout and imposter syndrome right now. And I don't think, it's easy we've been in this phase of our careers for the past year plus. And so, it's like that analogy of like the frog in the boiling water thing. Like it doesn't realize that it's been, boiling all this time because it started off, chill or whatever. But over time, it boils up and bad things happen. I think people can forget that we are in a bad time. And so this expectation of being workhorses, like you mentioned before, is not really realistic. So, Veni, what do you think about that?
Yeah. This is similar to what Sherrie was saying. Like, I think a lot of us are going through burnout. And for me, I definitely hit a bad point last year once the pandemic started. I actually quit my full-time job to work on my business full-time last year in January before the pandemic. And then once the pandemic hit, I was just like, whoa, my life just turned upside down. And I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to manage this new situation. And, as I mentioned before, like I'm a mom, I have a 3-year-old. At that time she was like 2, and she's a very, very social baby. And we actually put her, kept her at home for 4 months because we just didn't know, and we were too scared to send her to daycare. So we kept her home for 4 months, and I was basically taking care of her during the morning time until my husband was done with work. And then I would do my work shift after he was done. So we were doing that for after 4 months, I was like, I don't know how to keep going because I had people say, do self-care, do this. I'm like, I didn't have time to do any self-care because I have a child who's depending on me. I have to keep going. Honestly, like the way I ended up managing it is just like doing the most minimum that I can do to survive. Yeah. So that was my strategy. And oddly, my business started picking up around that time too. So I actually just had to let go of customers. I was like, I cannot support you right now. So I just had to like pick and choose what I was going to do. And I had to pick and choose like, the work stuff, like house was a mess. all of that. Like there was not much cooking happening at that time. We ate out a lot. It was just like, okay, do what we can. Try not to be perfect about it. Try not to be a perfect businesswoman. Try not to be a perfect, mom. Just do what you can, and that's kind of how I've been dealing with it. And actually, it was a good. In a way, it was good that it really taught me how to say no and to kind of like really, really prioritize what's important to me. So in that way, it's helped. And I think there's still some burnout happening, but it's like a lot more manageable.
Yeah, I think about parents, or I've thought a lot about parents during the pandemic, because even before the pandemic, my colleagues and friends with kids were already maxed out. And to have kids at home and schooling them, and also juggling. Some of them were leaders at their organization, so like it was a lot. I was just witnessing that, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, it's crazy. So kudos to everybody who is a parent who has weathered the storm, this craziness, this crazy time, and is still doing a dang thing. Good job. Paull, Mr. Almost new parent. What has been your experience with imposter syndrome and burnout?
So mine, I think my burnout turned into imposter syndrome, which I feel like I may not be the only person who dealt with that, but so my burnout happened in a season that was really hard for me and my family. We had like a lot of family members we lost in a short period of time, and kind of like Sherrie said, I don't know how I would have made it without therapy and counseling these past few years, but a term that I've kind of like learned over the past few years since that season is a form of grief that they call ambiguous grief. It's a term that they use for like divorce or like a kid who's been abducted. It's like a grief that doesn't kind of like end; it just kind of prolongs. And so there's a lot of form of like what my counselors have called like ambiguous grief in that season. I just paint that backdrop because I lost my dad in this season, and I went back to work, and my manager was like, hey, like you need to go to visit your team out on the West Coast. And this was like maybe 5 days after this had all happened. And I was like, no, like I've got to stay home. I've got to like deal, like be with my family. And I got reprimanded pretty badly for that. And just like a sequence of things started to happen from that. To the point that I was like in a performance improvement conversation, and I kind of just broke down, not because of the performance improvement conversation, but just because life was just hard. And I remember my manager was starting to critique me on crying, and I had to stop her at one point and was like, hey, like it's actually healthy for me to cry right now. Like this is an okay thing to do. Like this is actually a very normal response to cry. And I think she just kind of had to like learn that in her own moment to figure that out. Anyways, all that to say, that was just like a season of burnout. And I think it was like the epitome of like, I didn't leave the company, I left the manager kind of situation. So I went to, so I kind of like left that kind of in a season of like a lot of loss of confidence in myself, just in life, in my emotional state. Psychological safety in a lot of ways. So when I started at Dropbox, I honestly kind of started being like, and being in a pandemic, I was like, I'm not going to know anybody. I'm going to have to prove myself even more. So that kind of that starting point of starting at Dropbox is really hard. And Dropbox was a place that I really admired. Like the design culture was something I really, really admired. And so walking in, I was like, I don't even know how I got this job. I think something happened and some fluke happened and I got into the system. And so it's been really great at Dropbox. I have an incredible manager. She's been super supportive, allowing a lot of space, especially in this past year, to kind of help kind of have conversations around, the circumstances and events over the past over a year now, I guess. And I think that's kind of really helped. So finding safety, finding people who can give you support, honestly, has been helpful. And then I think personally, something that's been helpful for me is like thinking about the long game, I think it's really easy, especially whether it's like physical health, mental health, whatever it is. I think sometimes we're like, oh, like I got on a treadmill, yesterday and I didn't get on it today. Like it can be really harmful to think about it in terms of days. And so something that I've been trying to do is like think about it in longer time units. So like months, years. And so like looking back and being like, man, like 2 years ago that happened and I'm much better than I was then, rather than, evaluating myself like the day after I quit that job and like, I'm a terrible person, so like thinking about a long time span, I think has really helped kind of like build some resilience in that.
No, you're getting a lot of support in the chat. I've been low key keeping an eye on it. But I want to mention some things that people are saying here. Sherrie said, I feel like Paull is uncovering something I've experienced in tech. We promoted highly performing individual contributors into managers, but they don't always have the leadership, empathy, and people skills. And I wanted to, when you mentioned that story about your manager, I wanted to, like, it incensed me. Like I was really pissed off and I had to like bring myself back. But something that managers, who are watching this, something that you need to do, whether you have it at your organization or not, is learning more about emotional intelligence. And that's not even shade. It's tea. Like if you're going to be managing people, you have to understand people and how they work. You just can't say, do this, do that, and expect them, not expect them to ignore their lives, the hard stuff that they go through every day or once in a while. I'm really sorry that you went through that.
Trevor, can I ask a question from the chat? Angela posted, or may I?
Go for it.
Angela posted something about the juxtaposition of vulnerability, tech, and culture. And Angela, I'm curious to hear about what you mean by that.
Yeah, it's just interesting because we keep talking about technology, right? And like on its face, technology sometimes can be looked at as very scientific, very quantitative, very straightforward. But then there's these stories of people feeling like I am a human being. So it's just an interesting play on tech, humanity, tech, vulnerability. Do you feel like you're allowed to be vulnerable in this space? And on top of that, being Asian in this space, like you're adding these layers of like nuances that maybe it's interesting to see that experience from an Asian perspective, especially as you think about technology in general. So I was curious about that just because we were talking about both like the hard and soft, right? The hard skills, the soft skills. And it just seems like technology is just such a place where that would happen often, where you're not allowed to be. So that was just my thinking behind it. And thank you for Sherrie for calling that out. Appreciate it.
No, Sherrie, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on a couple things. I listened to the Angela's wonderful South by Southwest panel, Designing in a World Without White Supremacy. And what it made me think about, like this comment here, is just in tech, we're all about data and we're all about performance. And I work at Indeed in an org where it's like, just show me the data. And then I always have to defend research and bring forth customer insights to be like, it's not just data. Like these are humans. There's all of you in UX understand there's psychology behind the way we design things and build things, right? And Angela touched upon this, but we have this culture that's so performative and it doesn't allow for things that, to Paull's kudos, I feel like it's hard for Asian people to even go to therapy to talk about feelings. And like our generation is breaking that mold. Like our parents are like, therapy, what? You crazy? Like that's kind of the thing. And so I think that a lot of that just like unlocked for me is like, we have this responsibility and this knowledge and this experience now to bring forth human aspects in the jobs that we have and the pivotal work that we do, because in a world of white supremacy, we're designing for one facet and it's not taking into account humanity. So to Angela's point, like, I think vulnerability, I think emotional intelligence, to Trevor's point, it's absolutely critical in the way we build and design and work. And it's not a people soft thing. It's what's necessary. Like there's no ifs, ands, or but, and it's not one thing or the other. They have to go hand in hand.
Right. Lan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I love everything everyone is saying. So I'm like, yeah, snaps everywhere. Yeah, right. Because we have this idea of what professionalism is, but the reality is that definition is created by people who didn't think about people who didn't think and look like them. And so this idea that you have to be hard and aggressive and never cry is just like complete bullshit. So I hope that moving forward, we challenge those notions, because it is really uninclusive. There's so many aspects to our culture and those systems we live in that aren't thinking about people who don't look like or think like the majority. And so, yeah.
Right. No, thank you, Angela, for bringing that up. That's something that's come up a lot, especially for me as a design systems operative. A lot of what people think about design systems is the software part of it, but there's a lot of people engagement. We're like highly collaborative as a design system operative or a design system team. We're connecting with everyone, product managers, designers, developers, leadership, where there's a lot of people skills that you have to have, not just like putting together a component, so there's always that tug of war of like, how do I so how do I balance the two? No, but that's a very good point. So thank you for bringing that up. I do want to direct our attention back to Sherrie really quickly. Sherrie, I remember when the parent and caregivers inclusion group at Indeed was an idea that you were kind of mulling around, and you were beginning to campaign for its founding at Indeed. Why was this initiative important to you? And what have you learned since founding the parent and caregivers inclusion group?
Yeah, thanks for the question and for highlighting that. So I told y'all about getting job offers and declining them earlier. And part of it was realizing some of the goodness I had at Indeed at the time, which was great parental policies, just a lot of support, flexibility, a great culture. And I thought, I wonder how parents at Indeed feel, if they feel a sense of belonging or if they feel excluded. And I thought of the many times I've turned down happy hours and opportunities for networking that get you further in your career because I wanted to be with my family, and how disadvantaged I felt about that. And then I just unlocked all of these stories. I became a UX researcher and just started asking parents, how do you feel about the workplace? And it's really crazy. So I'll drop some stats on y'all. In the last year, 5 million women have been forced out of the workforce during COVID, mostly due to caregiving, when they lost schools and daycares closed and they had nowhere to send their children. And there's reasons behind this. Working parents, and moms specifically, are spending more time parenting than their stay-at-home counterparts in the 70s. So we're working and we're parenting more than stay-at-home moms used to parent. And what I found out is 43% of new moms and 23% of new fathers leave STEM roles after their first child. It's like, wake up, Paull. I don't know. Are you going to leave your job? Like, there's a reality that could happen. And I just feel like moms are very marginalized and unvalued in America. Yet the economy depends on us and our buying power. So 41% of moms are sole or primary breadwinners. 80% of Black moms are breadwinners, with 1 in 4 of them living below the poverty line. So that's just like bonkers. And I talked to you about the wage gap before. The mom wage gap compared to white non-Hispanic men is 70 cents to the dollar, but for Black moms, it's 49 cents to 68 cents. And so now we know why people are living in poverty. And I also found out that high-earning moms lose 10% of their income with every kid they have, but dads get a 6% bonus for every kid. Why? Because we assume dads will keep working and moms will stay home, but that contradicts the fact that moms are breadwinners now. So it's just this really horrible cyclical issue. And there's studies that show that the maternal wall happens when you're pregnant or when you become a mom. You're viewed as less competent and less committed to your job, which is absolutely untrue. And Veni and I already talked about all the power we bring to the table, plus the ability to focus, prioritize, get shit done, and go home and take care of a family, or do it at the same time, honestly, because they got stuck at home with us. And the last thing I'll say is just like, I really felt what I uncovered is that corporate America, to Angela's point, just lacks empathy. And this is the most staggering stat of all is, you know, when I had a baby, people threw me a baby shower and I got gifts and I got a parental leave. When Black women get pregnant, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy. So the reality is I have to wonder if they'll come back to work. And that is absolutely atrocious. And there's a whole other topic we can have on like the healthcare system and how it's designed inequitably. But I just really need people to know that. And for those that don't have kids, my response is, do you have anybody in your life you love? Because COVID has shown us that you will likely become a caregiver. And if not in the past year and a half, you will, if those people age or get the privilege of aging. And so most millennials are becoming caregivers, and many of them are having to leave the workforce for caregiving for the elderly. So it's everybody's problem. And you can see I'm on my soapbox because I'm so excited about this work, and it's gained a lot of publicity because COVID showed that it was untenable, and Biden released the American Families Plan recently, but it's still got to get through Congress. So we just all need to show up and vote for stuff that matters in society and not let politicians duke it out over whether this is a partisan issue, because it's not. It's the future of our society.
No, those are all very good points, and thank you for taking on that social work that I think it's something that a lot of us have to, think about and plan for. Also, being caregivers. Someone in the chat said, "What is the parental leave at Indeed?" So it seems like you might have you might be getting some referral bonus soon.
Yeah, it's 16 weeks, which is longer than the average of 12 weeks. But in Germany, they have 3 years. So there's just very huge discrepancies between countries and the way they value what it means to nurture young kids.
Right. That brings up a good point, or something that I was listening to last night. One of our leaders, Carmen Broomes, and one of our new members, Carmen Johnson, I believe, they were on a podcast called Technology 200, which is a podcast about for women of color in tech. And they were discussing being moms in tech and what that experience is like. And what they were saying, or at least one of the Carmens was saying, was a year would be the least of what we would need for parental leave. And so just hearing 3 years, like, even that didn't surprise me. Just hearing that, I was like, I'm not a parent, I'm single. So, I'm wiser now to y'all's, what y'all have to go through. And I'm super impressed. And so anyway, let's move on. Paull, you recently joined the ADP list as a mentor. Tell us more about what ADP list is and what mentoring other designers means to you.
Yeah, so ADP list stands for Amazing Design People. That's what ADP stands for, not the HR tech thing that I think I was confused with at first when I signed up for it myself. I had some colleagues at Dropbox who were on the list already. And so basically what it is, it's a platform where it's free. You can just register for an account. You can also apply to be a mentor. And you can just search for different things like region, if you have like a passion, different skills you're looking for, or if you want like a portfolio review. It's a great platform. And so I've been doing that for a couple of months now. And I think there's another form of mentorship that I've been doing longer for a UX bootcamp called Design Lab. And I would say that the two platforms are somewhat different. I think Design Lab, because, you're kind of like paying for a program and you're trying to graduate with a portfolio and get a job. The motivations, I think, are a little bit different than, someone on ADP list. The sessions also on ADP list are a little bit, I guess it depends on the person you're signing up for, but they tend to be a little bit shorter at like 30 minutes. And so we kind of need to hash through a lot more things. But the fun thing about ADP list is that there's really no agenda. We're not going through curriculum. We're not, going through like some type of assignment. which is good on its own too. So I kind of like the diversity that I have right now and the opportunities I have. But I think there's a lot of fun things in ADP List because we just kind of hop on. I may never see that person ever again. And so there's just kind of like, it's kind of like a quick little like speed dating kind of situation where we get to kind of dive into things. And I think it's really great to, I guess the last thing I'll say on ADP List that I like is that I think it kind of democratizes like design mentorship in general, because it's like if you want to go talk to like a designer at Airbnb or Google, which sometimes on LinkedIn can feel like a little distant, I think ADP List kind of like brings that a little bit closer to you, because you can just look, search at a company and that's kind of an easier way to connect as well. So I've kind of found that it kind of helps lower that bar, which I think is helpful for mentees to be able to engage into that environment.
No, that's a good point about approachability. That's something that we're looking into with BlackUXaustin in building up our mentorship program, because oftentimes it's better for people who are like you to mentor you, to share what they know. Often, depending on who you are, typically I'm speaking about like people of color. There are certain things that you wouldn't know in a general mentorship program for just anybody that you can learn. Speaking more about survival tips, especially what it's like to be a Black man in tech, what it's like to be a queer person in tech. You could learn from somebody who is like you and kind of show you the ropes and what they've done. So no, thank you for being a mentor. And also a quick plug here. If any of you on the panel want to be our mentors, just let us know. So when we build out that program. Lan, you recently spoke with UT Dallas UX students about your career path. I was in attendance at that talk and I thought you did a really great job, and notice the students were mostly young women. Is mentoring and sharing your story with women breaking into UX of particular importance for you? And why is that?
First, thank you, Trevor, for always being so supportive. You're such a great friend. It's funny. I have been talking to students, particularly my alma mater, because that is such an easy venue for me. Not because I pursued it. They had reached out, and I find that I just really enjoy working with people new in their careers. And whether that is altruistic or trying to help them avoid the crap that I had to go through, it is definitely enjoyable. And I appreciate such the level of passion and go-getterness that they have. Gen Z is just like in it to win it. And I'm just so proud of them. And so they were particularly women of color, which is exciting to see. They were so impressive. Like the level in which they were operating is just, love following them. So it's something I hope to continue doing. It's what I enjoy. And I think some of that is also driven from, recognizing the number of sacrifices people had to make for me to, be here today. And, the sacrifices people are continuously making. So I hope that I can do the same for those who come after.
Yeah, no, I think that's what, going back to what Sherrie was mentioning about being the only and burden and having that burden. I think that it's also a privilege too, because we get to share our survival tips with people, that are like us. We want more of us to stay in the field of tech and business as well, and kind of open more doors to everyone. So thank you for being a mentor. Yeah, and back to something that Paull mentioned about mentorship. You said that it was more like a dating revolving door or something like that. And you'll probably never see them again, but they'll always remember you. I think everybody on this panel and in this room in attendance can remember, their first grade teacher, somebody who taught you something, so long ago for me, but you remember the people that teach you things. So, I I want to move on to some more heavier topics. We wouldn't be, remiss if like we didn't discuss hashtag Stop Asian Hate. Recently, since the pandemic started, the Asian community at large has been under attack and has faced a lot of violence because of incendiary comments of like the COVID being called China flu and et cetera, and not very emotionally intelligent people have been pointing the finger at people who had nothing to do with that. So the following questions are kind of geared towards that. If you feel comfortable, would you mind sharing how xenophobia and racism has affected you during the pandemic? Angela, would you mind answering that one?
Well, I will say, I mean, I don't know if it's something that is just in the pandemic. And I think that's kind of a point that I would also like to make, is it's interesting because with everything that has been happening with, the Stop Asian Hate campaign, it's almost, I hate to say this, but you almost feel validated for all the things that you've gone through for your entire life. And it's like, oh, okay, so it took a pandemic for people to recognize this, and also, the context and all the news stories about the pandemic in general to get us there. But I will say, it's not necessarily something that has happened to me necessarily, like specifically an act of racism towards me. I mean, I can name many a time growing up and in my career where that has happened, microaggressions, not even things that you might say are like outright acts of racism, but things that have slowly and over time start really eating at your soul and lead to problems with confidence, lead to imposter syndrome, lead to all these things that really keep people like us down. But I digress. Part of what I've seen though is just, it's kind of a sad, like a side effect is my dad. He's so funny. He's retired and he's always been a warrior, like just always concerned about like my safety and the safety of others around me. He's just kind of like he's that type of high anxiety type of guy. So he was over visiting and we're all vaccinated, thank God. And so he's very careful about his exposure to people. And with everything that was happening, he comes over and he's like, hey, I got you something. He like got me a stun gun for protection. And I just felt, and I was, A, it was kind of funny because it was extreme. B, it was kind of cute because, clearly he cares. But C, it was also sad. It was like sad to see the effect of what's happening for Asians that are, out there and having these acts of violence happen to them, was that for him, it's a burden not only for himself, but for his kids and for the people that he loves, is he feels the need to protect them. And, at first I was like, Dad, I'm going to be fine. But then I also realized that this is a moment in time, is like, am I going to be fine? Like, can I assume that I am going to be fine when I'm walking down the street? Maybe not. And so that was really telling for me, is like, I'm a grown up adult and my father still feels like he has to protect me. And the irony is I feel like I have to protect him. So I know that that's not necessarily an outright story of racism against me, but it certainly is something that is telling of the culture and his mindset, our mindsets, and the things that you don't even really think about as an issue. It is. You think other people have dads coming up to them and saying, hey, here's a stun gun so you can protect yourself. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But that's just an experience that I've seen myself personally.
No, I totally relate to that. I think like you, when the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor situations last summer, protests were happening, and all of a sudden it was uncovered that systemic racism was a thing. It was like, really? Where have y'all been? So I totally relate to that. Sherrie, what do you have to say about xenophobia and racism?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Angela, my privilege as a professional. And the area I live in, South Central Austin, Amaya is one of the only Asian kids in her daycare. There's like 2 Black kids. If you combine 2 half Black kids, there's 1 Black kid. We live in a very white neighborhood, and you know, I'm not really surrounded by a lot of people who look like me. I have not had any outright acts of racism, but I could relate to Angela saying like that paranoia, because like you really don't know if it's just happening to random people on the street in front of fancy New York hotels, right? Like, really, are you safe anywhere? But I can also just relate to it. Unlocked for me a lot of suppressed memories in my childhood of growing up with a lot of this stuff. And I think that's part of the trauma I have faced this past year. I remember people calling me Ching Chong, people always thinking I'm Chinese, even though I'm Vietnamese, and never knowing the difference, not being able to pronounce my last name correctly, Nguyen, 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 it's Nguyen. Actually, it's Nguyen, but you probably can't pronounce it correctly anyway, but I will tell you how it's pronounced. And for me, the whiplash has been to educate my daughter and expose her to know what could possibly be happening and what is happening, right? And so I send her to school with books about Lunar New Year, because I found out that week all they learned about was Valentine's Day, which is really not even a holiday. Come on, like it's a capitalist brand marketing campaign for the flower industry. And so, she said that everybody was super excited to learn about the Lunar New Year. And it was wonderful to see her culture represented. And so I think that that's kind of my what I've been feeling and dealing with, is just recognizing the microaggressions, which they pile up, has caused many just breakdowns, and trying to think about what I can do to show my daughter the reality of this world and equip her to know her place, her rightful place in it.
Yeah, I was going to say that representation matters a lot. So thank you for existing, to be honest, in those places where you're the only, Again, I reference one of our leaders on the team who shared her story in that podcast, who said that, I was the only Black mother and we were the only Black family until, somebody else came along. So just being there and, giving that solace, that relief to somebody else who, joins the neighborhood or the school is a big thing. It's an act of service. So good on you. Veni, have you ever felt in danger as an Asian person in the U.S.?
As I mentioned, I kind of grew up in Wisconsin. So I went to high school there, I went to college there. So I experienced some like minor things where, being a person of color in Wisconsin, you really stick out. Like any restaurant you walk into, everybody will stare at you because, I don't know, that's the thing to do, because you don't look like the rest of the people in the restaurant, and, things like that. And there were even certain things where it was just like crossing the street and, someone yelled bitch at me for, I don't know, I just crossed the street. And things like that. A few things happened. And another thing that happened was, when I was looking for my first job, I truly struggled. It took me about 2.5 years to get my first full-time job. And at some point I was like, what am I doing wrong? And I asked one of our college recruiters, give me some advice. And one of the things he pointed out was that, it would help if you write down US citizen under your name. And I was like, okay, that never occurred to me. Is this why nobody is giving me even a call back? Because nobody was even returning my, yeah. So things like that, minor things happen. And when I could get out of the Midwest, I was like, I really want to be out of the Midwest. I need to go somewhere where there's diversity. And I had a chance to do like an internship in DC a few summers back. And I was like, there's so many people that look like me. They're people of color. And I was so excited. And when I did get the chance, I convinced my husband that we need to get out of the Midwest. And we moved here. And, it was great. I still love it here, and it was great. And a few months before the pandemic, something just happened out of the blue where I was going to a conference and I stopped by the coffee shop to just get some coffee. And I thought, I'll just check my emails. And I was sitting there checking my emails. And then there's this guy, a white man. I didn't know him. He just looked at me, straight at me. And he said, I'm going to fucking kill you. Like, that's what he said to me. And I was terrified because it's like, oh, does he have a gun? Like, what do I do? Like, what do I do in the situation? And it was broad daylight. It was like 9 a.m. There were people in the coffee shop. It was not like just me and he dared to say this to me. And I got so scared. I just took my stuff and left because I was like, if I say anything back, I don't know what he will do. So I just left. And every time I go around that block, it just gives me major anxiety. And so anyway, over time, it's just like this fear has built up. And this pandemic, we've been all just indoors. And actually, we're all vaccinated and we're going on a road trip tomorrow to visit my parents. And all of a sudden, I'm feeling like anxiousness. I'm like, oh my God, we have to see other people. Are we safe? Like, on this road trip, if we stop at a gas station, if we stop by for food, it's just like a lot of the stuff is just coming out. And it's definitely caused, a lot of mental stress. So one other thing was that, okay, I thought I was not safe in the Midwest. I thought if I moved to a, area that's diverse, that I would be safe. But it turns out it may not be. So that just messes you up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot. Yeah. I definitely have that feeling of nowhere is safe, I just want to say that you're getting a lot of love in the chat. Malati is saying that's so awful. Tema is saying, I'm so sorry to hear that happened to you. Deanna is saying, I'm so sorry. So thank you for sharing that story. Wow. While I have you here, I know that was probably really difficult to share, but you recently educated me on something that I had no idea about, that there was a whole nother racist or classist system that's happening. You recently brought to my attention that when Indian immigrants come to the US, the caste system persists and individuals from the lower caste experience mistreatment and sometimes violence from individuals from upper castes. Quoting from a Bloomberg article about the caste system in tech, people will try to segregate you once they find out your caste, he says. As a matter of self-preservation, I've avoided good opportunities when I see that the CEO or CTO is Indian, and that's a person being quoted is a person of Indian descent. You've mentioned that you come from a lower caste in India, which is courageous to say and to own. Would you mind sharing your experience with us and how the Asian experience in America can vary vastly?
So for folks who are not familiar, so in India, specifically to the Hindu religion, there is a caste system where people are born into whoever your family is. If you're born into that caste system, that's kind of what you are, kind of. And there are different castes. Some are on the higher levels and some are on the lower levels. And the lower castes, I think it happens even now, but historically they were treated very, very poorly. They were like the people who did your manual labor. And they were even termed as untouchables, where anything you touch became not good and people wouldn't even touch the things you touched. It's that was also there. So there's a lot going on there. So, but when you think that, you left India, so that you would imagine that doesn't exist here. And so let me go back a little. So my dad is actually also in tech. And I think he's the one who faced the brunt of it after he immigrated here. So what happened was when you moved here, you look for your community, right? When you're an immigrant, you look for people to hang out with. And when you're new, you're exposed to this new culture. So you try to find people who are like you. So like we joined like the community that was the Indian community in Wisconsin. And at that time, I wasn't really familiar with the caste system. I knew I was from a lower caste, but I didn't know what that truly meant. Like living as somebody who's a lower caste in India, I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't pay too much attention to it. But for my parents, what happened was the Indian tech community, like they treated my parents very poorly, like because my mom never went to college, she never had the chance. She didn't know how to speak English. So all of that, it was just like a lot of like putting her down constantly. And these were like educated people, like adults who would make my mom feel very like, now, like not worthy, like, almost. And I didn't understand it. I thought, like my mom is just taking things too seriously. It's like, I was just a dumb kid at that time. And I didn't pay attention to it. And then now I see that, like how that affected my mom and how hurt they felt. And it sucks because they left their family back in India. And they are here and they are trying to find community. And the community they found is also saying, hey, like, you're not part of our community, So they went through a lot of that. And the thing that affected us as kids is like, we don't know the Indian culture very well. My parents can teach us so much, and when you're not part of the Indian community, even here, we just know of stories. We don't really get to participate. We didn't get to participate in like the holidays, things like that. My parents were just like, once a few bad situations happened, they just like distance themselves more and more and more. So for me and my brother, like, sometimes we are confused about our identity because we're like, okay, we're born in India, but we don't actually know what it's like to be Indian, like we don't know the culture. We don't know all the festivities that happen because we didn't get to participate. And for me too, like now that I have a daughter, like when we moved to this area, even like I'm kind of scared to kind of go into the Indian community because I don't know what to expect. Are they going to, ask me for my caste, and are they going to treat me and my child poorly because we are of lower caste? So all of that is also like, as you mentioned in the article, like it also goes into the workplace. And for my dad, like he didn't get promotions because, even though he worked for a company where there were a lot of Indians and there were managers who were Indians, and he never, got those opportunities to promote, or like he had to just give into whatever they needed. And just work long hours and just put up with it because, at that time when we moved, he was on like a specific visa where he couldn't just quit and go to a new job, right? So you have to put up with all of that, and you can't speak up because if you do, it could cost your job. And my dad had, my brother and me, my mom to support. So he just had to like put up with all of that. And and it's tough. So even though you think, you might have a community, and it turns out you don't. So it makes the experience of moving here much more harder.
Right. Some people in the chat are discussing everything that you're saying. Thank you for sharing that. By the way, Malati says, without getting into a lot of unrelated stuff, caste system was also largely because of colonial attempts to divide the country and create internal discord. India was under colonial rule for 300 plus years. Speaking about division, there is this concept of model minority myth, and I kind of want to address that as well. I think a lot of people of color, I think I'm okay in saying it this way. A lot of people of color kind of view Asians as kind of like the higher, if we're thinking about classism a little bit, as East Asians, particularly as higher class in the corporate world, which is not necessarily the case. So I just want to introduce the model minority myth. And according to learningforjustice.org, the myth of the model minority is based in stereotypes. It perpetuates a narrative in which Asian American children are whiz kids or musical geniuses. Within the myth of the model minority, target moms force children to work harder and be better than everyone else, while nerdy, effeminate dads hold prestigious but not leadership positions in STEM industries like medicine and accounting, as Paull mentioned before. This myth characterizes Asian Americans as a polite, law-abiding group who have achieved a higher level of success than the general population through some combination of innate talent and pull yourselves up by your bootstraps immigrant striving. What are your thoughts on the model minority myth? Sherrie?
I was like, I didn't want to be called first for this one because we might have to all take turns unpacking the layers of this because there's like lots of layers.
I want to get everybody's opinion. So I'll
pick one thing. What resonated me, thank you, Veni, for sharing your story. I've done a lot of reading and trying to educate myself on the Indian class system, and it's truly horrific, especially what happens at tech companies in India, where they like make you talk about your caste and your scores on entry exams as you enter like the technical institutes, and then people bully you if you fall below a certain level. It's ridiculous, but it happens. And I think the thing that I can relate to in the chat that somebody said, it's an attempt to divide people and deflect from positions of power that are still winning, still in power, still making money off of all of us who are at the bottom of the ladder fighting each other for scraps, right? Like nothing has changed, and the 1% keep getting richer. Capitalism continues to pervade all the systems that we know and are living part of. We're completely deflected from the real problem, right? And so I think one of the things that's harmful about the model minority myth is that Asians are closest to whiteness because it's caused assimilation, trying to blend in, like everybody has said, keep your head down, just work hard. But as soon as somebody says Kung Flu, then we're the problem, right? Or as soon as, there's laws enacted, right? Like the Exclusion Act that kept our race, that kept Chinese people from coming here, or then having a quota system where only certain people of backgrounds, which is why the model minority myth perpetuates, only engineers and doctors were able to come over. There's so many things that have really led to this, but I feel it. I feel my position in benefiting from it. And I understand my accountability and my responsibility to speak up against it and to make sure like a rising tide lifts all boats. So I think, I said in a talk once, I was like, I don't really want to climb the ladder because getting to the top seems miserable and damaging and scary. But let's knock down the ladder and let's all hang out and party at the bottom, together. So I'll let somebody else take the floor.
I'm totally down for a party. What about you, Angela?
I mean, we talk about division all the time. It's like, it's the construct that continues to build problems between lots of groups of people of color, right? So, I mean, it's tough because there's also this expectation almost for you to perform at abnormal levels as well. It's like, what do people think just because I'm Asian that I'm gonna knock this out of the park? It's an interesting thing because, you damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of scenario, right? Like nothing is good enough. It's a double-edged sword, but the bar is always higher and higher, right? And so it's interesting as well because in addition to the model minority myth, you also have the bamboo ceiling. So it's like, okay, so you've got the myth and then you got the ceiling. It's like, where's the box is so small. How much more can we be pigeonholed into these stereotypes? So it's pretty incredible. It's a very real thing. And, in this industry in particular, where depending on what your role is, Asian representation can be sparse in some areas and incredibly representative in others, right? So it's a tough game to play all the time. And I know from my personal experience too, is, although I am a business development person. You don't see a lot of Asians in business development because it's very much a role where you have to be out there. You can't be, shy. You have to be gunning all the time. It's interesting to be in that position where you're playing both sides a bit. And so I just think it's this duality that Asian people within this industry always have to balance, always have to figure out every time. And that is exhausting. But this is my own personal experience. So it is real, it is pervasive, it's damaging, and it's something that we have to deal with every day. So the more that people understand and are aware of the implications of that, of a phrase and how it applies to people's lives, I think is important. So then maybe people can understand a little bit more of how to treat others that might not, that they may not actually have that lived experience with. So my little rant, but my opinion.
Paull, what do you think?
I think Sherrie and Angela, they've shared like a lot of great perspective on it. So I'm like, what can I add? I mean, I guess my thing, like the term that, or the image that comes to mind when I think about model minority is like, it's kind of like this like safety cone or box that I feel like as a kid, I was like trained to go find. It's like be in orchestra, like be good at math, like, like there's all these like stereotypes but I kind of played into it because it was also rewarded, like if I played in that system too. And so now I think, being older and like not in those systems and like just trying to figure out life, like there's a lot of areas where I think my wife and I are just coming to a place where like we just don't fit into boxes, and that's okay. And like we're just gonna have to figure that out. So for reference, like my wife is half Hispanic, half white. So our children will just be everything. It's kind of just what, we're trying to figure out. And so it's like, even that is so confusing to us right now. Is like, how do we raise them as Koreans and Hispanic and white? Like, or what box will they check? Like, these things that feel very like, small, but they are also very confusing, like there's not a safe place for that. But I think one example, with the current events that I think has been helpful is that when all this like Asian hate crimes were starting, and one of the reasons I was like so honored to be a part of this panel is because I think I found the most allyship from like my Black friends, like being able to like supply that allyship. And I think the model minority, at least in my mind, the narrative that it played out was like, well, like you shouldn't speak out. You shouldn't be loud. You shouldn't say things. You shouldn't share things. You should just kind of like keep it all inside, even though it's really hard and you're scared for your elderly family members like all the time. And you're scared for your own life, like going through the streets sometimes. And I think it was really helpful for particularly two friends of ours who just kind of encouraged us not to like over dramatize like what like we were experiencing, but also like giving us like the permission to be able to like share our experiences. And so when the Atlanta shootings happened, and we don't have to go into like a whole myriad of this, but like my mom was actually assaulted like several years ago, and like kind of like what Sherrie was explaining about like having to relive like past events, like that these attack, like events will touch. I like share that on Instagram, and like it was helpful to like put that out there, like, hey, like this isn't something that just happened like one time in Atlanta. This has been happening for a long time, and kind of like breaking that myth of like we didn't just grow up in this like suburb as this like orchestra geek, like these things, like horrific things like did happen to us, like growing up, like these are hard realities. And I think it really has helped like foster some conversation around that. This like box is like very fragile, that I think the construct of this model minority is actually more fragile than what people imagine it to be, I think.
No, that's very valid. I was, when you mentioned, that you got support from your Black friends, because we've experienced this a lot as well. I just got this mental image in my head of just like being at a bar and being like, here's a drink, sit down. have a drink with me because we've been there. And granted, you guys have been there also. I think our issues are just more out there and more blatant because of the country that or the space that we live in.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, I'm glad you said that, because I think that was one of the things I felt weird about. Was I was like, well, I don't want to share my experiences to undermine or like take away the stage like from other minority groups' experiences. And I felt like it was really helpful for my friends to set the stage of like, no, like there's room for all of it. Like one doesn't outdo the other. Like we've got to talk about it all. And I was like, oh, okay, like this is helpful.
Yeah, that's what I'm, with hashtag Stop Asian Hate. That's one rewarding thing or cool thing that I'm seeing is that there's this breakdown of this idea that we can only do one thing at a time. When people post about like injustice towards Asian people, they also say Black Lives Matter. It's just carrying it forward. It's not just, erasing the issue of yesterday, which is still an issue today, which is carrying it forward. Yes, and yes, and there's a lot of ands, to be honest. This world is a little bit crazy. So speaking of, I think you were mentioning like when you were a kid, you had to carry forward, you felt this pressure to carry forward certain stereotypes or several expectations. I know a lot of Black kids in the room, former Black kids in the room can attest to this. If there's one thing Black children can remember their parents teaching them is that we have to work twice as hard to get half as what white people get, sometimes even more than twice, a lot of the times. While there's some truth to that, this is, for me in particular, this has yielded a toxic relationship with perfectionism for me personally. I've heard within the Asian community that some are taught by their parents to always bring their best selves forward in every sense. Veni, is this true for you, and how does it show up for you in your work life?
Mm-hmm. So I'm actually the first woman on my mom's side to actually go to college, and I'm also and we are the few. We're actually, I think, the only family in our compared to extended family to came to America. So like my parents gave up a lot to come here. So there is a sense of like, okay, they did all this for me. So I have to I have to keep, make sure that, I'm doing the things that they can be proud of. And then also that, all their sacrifices were worth it, So there's it's a lot of pressure when you're a kid and you come here. And also another thing is for my parents, they also, I think, had a sense of we are representing our country here and we are representing, our family. So you always have to put your best foot forward. And so all of that was just not exactly said to me, but I kind of felt it. And that it put a lot of pressure on me. And some of the ways that kind of hurt me is because as I was going through college, I would get super stressed out. Even if I knew the material, I would get super stressed out and just not do well on the exam. Mm-hmm. Things like that would happen. If I had to give a presentation, I would know my material, but I would just choke up, the perfection, because I needed everything to be right. And I would put so much effort up front, but that at the end of it, I was just kind of not be able to get through it because I put so much pressure on myself. And over time, I actually just kind of that made me just hide more and more of myself. So I just kept going behind the scenes, okay, I can do the work, but I'm just going to be behind the scenes. I don't want to be in the front. I would just, I would work hard, but over years that I did that for a long time. And eventually, a few years back, I decided I wanted to start my own business. And that's when my whole perfectionism was really hurting me, because I was when you want to start a business, it would not be perfect. You have to do so many trials and you fail a lot and you have to figure out what works not. And you can't, it's just not, being a businesswoman and being perfectionist just do not go. So yeah, that really taught me
there's a
to
lot
let
of
go of that. What's that?
I was saying that there's a lot of vulnerability in being a business person. Sure.
Yeah, that kind of like really helped me to kind of let go of it. And now I'm kind of like, I will work hard as I can and I will give it a shot. And then, and see how things go. And that really like helped me chill out a bit.
Lan, what do you have to say about perfectionism? Do you experience it yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Especially like growing up, because I'm sure for many people, perfectionism is the currency of love in my family, at least, and I'm sure many others. And so it was hard to shed this idea that in order to be loved and valued, I had to put always my best foot forward. And of course, that language erases what your best really is. It contains multitudes, because if you are depressed and trying to be the best of the best, you're just digging yourself a deeper hole, and you really can't pour from an empty cup. And so I think now I've shifted my understanding to, my best today will not be my best overall. If maybe my best is just crying in the shower and eating popcorn in bed, but other days, maybe it's like killing it at work, killing it at home, whatever. And so I definitely have to challenge perfectionism every time, while also creating safe spaces for myself and others to be human.
Yeah.
And that's really the best perfect.
Yeah. No, you are basically reading my life story. So there was like a little bit of a stifling a cry just now. But thank you.
I learned so much from you. So much.
No, I learned from you as well. We're having like a friend moment right now. But anyway, while I have you, what is an example of someone who has been a good ally to you? And don't mention me, please.
Oh, man. Wait, is that one for me?
Yes, it is.
Okay. It's so... I think I'm so hungry for allyship or space to be my true self. Like I'm not origami. I can't continue to fold myself into spaces that I don't belong in or people don't want me in. And so when I find a space that actually welcomes my difference and creates space for me, just like even as simple as like, hey, someone interrupted you. Can you finish your thought? Or hey, Lan, we forgot to include you in this meeting. Let me catch you up so I can get your opinion. Just those little things. Earlier, you had mentioned I talked at UX Club for UTD, and I talked about some pretty hard topics, which sexism, racism, ageism, all those things. And we have to get approval before we do any sort of talk. And so my boss's boss pulled me aside and was like, hey, I need 15 minutes with you. And of course, like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired, settled in. And really what she did was, the first time that it's happened to me was that, she wanted to ask to make sure that I hadn't experienced those things at Capital One. And of course I start crying because I'm a crier and I'm proud of it. But that was the first time that has happened. And I've been in the workforce for like almost 13, 14 years. And so it's sad that it's taken this long for people to hold space for really anyone. And I'm glad it's shifting. And I hope people continue to do those things and be mindful of the challenges people who don't identify with you and what they face, so you can catch them and hold people accountable.
Yeah. I just want to look at the chat real quick. Someone that says, I don't know their actual name, but it says from iPhone, go where you're celebrated, not tolerated. Awesome panel. Thank you for joining us. And then Chase said, Lan is spitting poetry. People are like pulling quotes from everything that you're saying. So thank you for sharing all that with us. I want to jump around a little bit, and because I know we're running short on time. I wish we could like make this a 4-hour event, but because there's a lot of really good stuff talking here that we're talking about. How can we, and this is an open question, so anybody who wants to jump at it can go for it. How can we work together to dismantle systemic racism? I'll just call a name because I see some pretty strong reactions there.
I can try. I'm not going to. This is. I think this is what I'm processing. So this is like very fresh in my mind. But I think there's, go ahead.
By we, I mean the Black community and the Asian community, and I guess the other marginalized communities as well, but particularly.
Yeah. I think most people will probably resonate with the fact that there's probably a difference between like listening and like active listening. I think there's a difference there. And so I feel like that's kind of like something that I'm really processing a lot, is like, sometimes I'm like, I think they heard me, but I don't think they understood me. I think they just kind of like interpreted my communication, but they don't really understand. And so I think that's kind of just like a framework of awareness that I have, like when I'm having these conversations, which are very exhausting, is just trying to like come to like a sense of like, it's okay if they didn't hear me thoroughly and understand this like the first time. And it's kind of going back to the thing I said earlier of like, it's going to take a long time, because it took a long time to like create this pervasive system. So like, it's going to take, an even longer time to get out of it. The other thing I've thought about a lot is, and this might be somewhat controversial and somewhat hard, is that I've been trying to not take people's perspectives too personally. Because I've been trying to like give them a benefit of the doubt that maybe what they think or know or behave in isn't because of their own choice. It might just have been like their environment. And so like, I think the way that my wife and I talk about it a lot is that we like to sit in a lot of tension, meaning that there can be space for, and it's kind of like what I said earlier, like there's like stage for all of these, oppressions, like we can talk about them all. And I think one of the ways that's really challenging sometimes, like in a conversation where we're like trying to be inclusive, is sometimes inclusivity might go too far to exclude like, dissenting opinions. And so like, I feel like my wife and I, what we try to do is to go even farther to people that like really don't make us feel safe to understand them as well. And that's not easy and that's not always safe. But I think sitting in that tension, I think has been really helpful for us to at least start to do that hard work of, kind of trying to understand each other in this conversation.
And you're breaking down those walls. Good job.
I agree with Alicia's comment.
I did. I just, I'm not going to ignore your mention there, but I'm going to move on to the panelists. Angela, what do you think?
I think it's interesting that Paull has talked a lot about like being able to embrace other opinions as well. I think sometimes we get in our own echo chamber, if you will. So, I'm gonna say something that I think I've said on another panel at one point, is that sometimes the problem seems so huge that it's just impossible to tackle. And where do you start? But I think just those tiny daily decisions that you make as an individual has such a rippling effect around everyone that you touch and you engage with. And so I feel like and this is maybe a softer answer, but I feel like a lot of it is just like what you are doing on your daily basis to represent and to live out this vision of not having systemic racism be a thing, right? It's like trying to do everything that you can with what you have to be a source of strength for people and to be someone that stands for something and stands for that vision. So it's not the most academic answer, but I do feel like it's something that people like are always wondering is like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And there's a sense of urgency to like push something through, but it's those small, tiny split decisions that you make to either stand up for someone, to be a mentor, to raise your hand, to say something when it's hard. Those are all movements to something. And so I have to believe that us acting as individuals collectively can really help that. And the more people try and the more people do, but also do it slowly and do it thoughtfully and do no harm, I think is just as impactful as political change and laws and, all the things that have to, stand up a system that actually supports that. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Like I said, I wanted this to be much longer. There's so many questions that we have here that I wanted to ask everyone. But I do want to say 2 things really quickly before I get everybody's closing remarks. Veni has an online resource for underrepresented people. If you're looking for a job, definitely go check it out. It's diversifytech.co. Even if you're not looking for a job, sign up for her newsletter, follow her on Twitter, follow Diversify Tech on Twitter as well. She is always really, really good about sharing or retweeting not only like Asians in tech or anything like that, but like Black people. There's a lot of Black representation on her Twitter, which I love. Thank you for being a great ally. So in closing, do you guys have anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks for asking. And I really appreciate Angela and Paul's perspective on that last question. I think I'll just piggyback a little bit too. I think, when it comes to dismantling systemic racism, I'll bring it back to that Design a World Without White Supremacy panel that Angela and Lisanne and Carmen spoke on. I think we have a responsibility as product design, UX professionals. We have positions of privilege and power for the greater good. And, I think that Angela mentioned do no harm, which, I love that. I also see how people don't realize the harm that can be done. And we have to really question what do you mean by harm, right? And what are the people we're not including in that conversation, right? So when we talk about like, I'm in the job space, the hiring space, and we talked about bias today. Veni talked about that. It's not only excluding people through like bias in resumes, it's also like when we're in a Zoom world and nothing's closed captioned, there's people with disabilities that can't get through the day, right? So I think do no harm is like a baseline that we really have to work really hard towards. And then like inclusivity and belonging and building representative products is even beyond all of that. I think we have to really understand the systems and history that got us here. And again, when Angela said that's so complicated because you really have to unpack so many different things. Mm-hmm. But I think it's our responsibility to do that too. And I'll also say just becoming aware of our own biases and then realizing how we move through the world. And I think my experience as a mom is like Amaya is seeing all of this and she's going to learn about systemic racism through my behavior, right? So Amaya has unfortunately had to witness me snapping at my mother-in-law for saying something about Black people. And before I even had my coffee, I kind of went off and I told her that's not okay. And it's really harmful. And she cannot say these things in front of my daughter. And so for her to witness that, and the other day she was holding my hand and says, "Mommy, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story about an Asian mom and a Black mom." And so the Asian mom goes to a park and she sees a Black mom and there's a bully. And the bully says, "I don't like you and you can't be here." And then the Asian mom says, "That's not okay. That hurts. And she is my friend." And it's like, it's a silly little story she made up, but I think it's important because when we raise the future generation, this is how we dismantle systemic racism. Oh, I didn't plan that. This is how we dismantle systemic racism. We break, it's a generational issue. If we don't see it in our lifetime, then she has to see it in hers. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Who run the world? Yes. See? The future, y'all. 4 years old, and look, this is what we know. We know a female vice president, so there's possibility.
Yeah. Thank you, Amaya, for closing us out. Thank you all for joining us. We'll probably send out a survey after this to let us know how we did. Thank you, panelists, so much for joining us tonight. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.